My name is Harper Blake, and 5 years ago, I thought I had it all. I was living the life most people dream about, a life straight out of a glossy magazine cover. I had a beautiful house in Austin, Texas, with tall windows that poured sunlight into my kitchen every morning. I drove a shiny black SUV that turned heads at stoplights. I had a career I worked hard for, a circle of friends who envied my life, and a husband I believed was the love of my life. His name was Landon Blake, and to everyone else, he was the perfect husband. He had that charming smile that could win over a room, a strong presence that made him seem dependable, trustworthy. He was ambitious, dressed sharp, and always carried himself like a man in control. And me? I was hopelessly in love with him. We were the couple people pointed at and said, "That's relationship goals." Our social media was full of vacation photos, California beaches, snowy cabins in Colorado, little weekend getaways to San Antonio where we'd eat too much barbecue and laugh like teenagers. To the outside world, we were living the American dream. But here's the thing about perfect pictures. Sometimes they hide the cracks underneath. I still remember the night everything shifted. It was a warm spring evening in Austin, the kind where the air smells like blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. Landon and I had just hosted a dinner party at our home, wine glasses clinking, candles glowing, soft jazz in the background. Everyone left around 10, and I was exhausted but happy. I went upstairs to change, expecting Landon to follow me, like he always did. But instead, I heard him in the kitchen, pacing, talking low into his phone. I thought maybe it was a work call. He was a financial consultant, and late-night calls weren't uncommon. But something in his voice felt different, urgent, secretive. When I walked back down, he hung up fast, sliding his phone into his pocket like it was a reflex. I told myself not to overthink it. After all, we'd been married for nearly 6 years at that point. If there was anyone I could trust, it was Landon. For weeks, I kept brushing off little signs. The later nights at the office, the sudden obsession with hitting the gym, even when he was already fit. The way he seemed distracted during our conversations, as if his mind was someplace else, entirely. And then, the intimacy stopped. We'd always had a spark. We laughed, we touched, we loved easily. But suddenly, he was too tired, too busy, or simply not in the mood. I started questioning myself. Was I not attractive anymore? Was I too wrapped up in work? Was I failing him somehow? I wanted so badly to believe that nothing was wrong. I wanted to hold on to the picture of the perfect marriage I had built in my mind, but deep down, my gut was screaming at me. And let me tell you something. A woman's intuition? It's rarely wrong. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, while Landon snored lightly beside me. My mind kept whispering the same question over and over. What if he's hiding something? The doubt started to eat me alive. I'd look at him across the dinner table, laughing at some story about his coworkers, and in my head, all I could hear was, "Who are you, really?" Still, I clung to hope. Because hope is easier than heartbreak. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that my perfect life, the one I had worked so hard to build, might have been a lie all along. There was one night, though, that I'll never forget. It was a Friday. Landon came home late. Again, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual brand. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his hair mussed like he'd been rushing. I asked him where he'd been, and he said casually, "Just grabbing drinks with the guys from work." But here's the kicker. I knew his coworkers. I knew their wives. And one of them had texted me earlier that evening, inviting us both to join a group dinner. Landon had told them we were busy. He lied. That night, as I sat in bed while he showered, I stared at his phone on the nightstand. My hands shook as I reached for it. My heart hammered so hard in my chest, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I knew it was wrong. I knew that snooping through his phone was crossing a line. But my gut told me I had to, that if I didn't, I'd drown in my own suspicions. I didn't open it. Not yet. I set it back down and pulled my hands into my lap. But in that moment, I made a decision. I would find out the truth, whatever it took. Because my name is Harper Blake, and I was not about to let my perfect little American dream collapse without knowing exactly who had lit the match. I wanted so badly to believe that everything was fine, that Landon was just stressed, that work was piling up, that maybe he was going through a phase. But denial only carries you so far before reality forces itself into the light. The first sign that something was truly off came one Tuesday evening. I had cooked Landon's favorite meal, chicken parmesan, garlic bread, a bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving. He walked in, suit jacket slung over his arm, phone pressed to his ear. He gave me a quick peck on the cheek, barely glancing at the table I'd set, and then retreated into his office. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. By the time he finally emerged, the food was cold. He muttered something about a client crisis and pushed his plate away. His eyes weren't on me. They were on his phone, as if whatever was inside that glowing screen mattered more than the wife sitting across from him. I told myself not to be dramatic. Everyone gets busy. Everyone has stressful weeks. But when those weeks turn into months, and the distance between you and your spouse becomes a canyon, you start to realize it's not just stress. The second sign came in the form of scent. Landon had always been predictable about cologne. He wore the same brand since college, a crisp, woody fragrance I could recognize instantly. But one night, he came home smelling different, sweeter, lighter. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't his. I asked him about it casually. He shrugged, said, "Oh, must have been at the gym. Someone probably sprayed too much in the locker room." He laughed it off, but the laugh didn't reach his eyes, and my stomach twisted into knots. The third sign was the one that broke me a little. We had always been affectionate, not just in the bedroom, but in the little ways. His hand on my back as we crossed the street. A kiss on my forehead when I made coffee in the morning. Those small gestures that told me I was loved. One night, I leaned in to kiss him after dinner, and he turned his face, letting my lips brush his cheek instead. It was subtle, almost dismissive, but to me it felt like a wall slamming down between us. I went to bed early that night, tears burning in my eyes. I stared at the ceiling, asking myself the same haunting question. What happened to us? I started analyzing everything. His gym bag. Was he really working out, or was it a cover? His receipts. Who spends that much at a business dinner? His laundry. Why were some shirts missing when I washed his hamper, and then came the secrecy? Landon used to leave his phone lying around without a care, but suddenly, it was glued to him. If I walked into the room, he'd flip it over, screen, down. He started locking it with a passcode, something he'd never done before. He took it into the bathroom with him, even when he showered. One night, I tested him. I asked, "Hey, can I borrow your phone? Mine's dead and I want to look up a recipe." His response wasn't normal. He froze. His hand tightened around the device, and then, forcing a smile, he said, "Just use your laptop. It's faster." My blood ran cold. That was not the reaction of an innocent man. The paranoia started eating. At me. I'd lie awake long after Landon had fallen asleep, the glow of his phone lighting up the nightstand. I'd watch it, wondering who was on the other end of those late-night notifications. Was it a coworker, a stranger, or someone else entirely? At work, I couldn't concentrate. I'd sit at my desk, staring at spreadsheets while my mind replayed. Every red flag like a broken record. My coworkers noticed. My best friend Jenna asked me over lunch if I was okay. I smiled, lied through my teeth, and said everything was fine. Because how could I admit the truth when I wasn't even sure what it was? But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was how Landon gaslit me. One night, I confronted him, not directly, but gently. I said, "You've seemed distant lately. Is everything okay?" He sighed, rubbed his temples, and said, "Harper, you're imagining things. You always overthink. I've just been stressed with work." He made me feel crazy, like I was the problem, like my intuition, my suspicions, were just insecurities I needed to get over. And for a while, I almost believed him. But women know. Deep down, we always know. The breaking point came late one Friday. Landon texted me saying he'd be working late at the office. Something about that didn't sit right. Call it a gut feeling. So I decided to surprise him. I drove downtown, parked across from his office, and waited. An hour passed. 2. The building was dark, empty. My heart sank as the truth punched me in the chest. He wasn't working. He wasn't even there. I drove. Home. Rage bubbling inside me like acid. I sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the front door, waiting. When Landon finally walked in past midnight, he looked startled to see me awake. His tie was loosened, his shirt untucked. I asked him calmly, "How was the office?" For a split second, his face betrayed him, a flicker of panic. Then he recovered, saying, "Exhausting. You wouldn't believe the day I've had, that." Was it? The moment I knew. He was lying, and in that moment, something inside me hardened. The denial evaporated. The fear turned into resolve. I wasn't going to live like this, in the shadows of his secrets, drowning in suspicion. No, I was going to find out exactly what he was hiding, and when I did, he'd regret ever thinking he could play me for a fool. For weeks, I felt like I was living with a stranger. The man lying next to me every night looked like Landon Blake. He sounded like Landon Blake. But the warmth, the love, the closeness we once shared, it was gone. And when you live like that, in constant suspicion, you start to lose yourself. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My friends told me I looked tired, drained. At work, I caught myself staring off into space, replaying every red flag in my mind like a crime scene. Detective. The stress of it all became unbearable, and then came the night when everything I feared was confirmed. It was a Saturday. Landon had left early that morning, claiming he had a conference call and then errands to run. Hours passed. He didn't text, didn't call, didn't check in once. By the time the sun dipped below the Austin skyline, my nerves were frayed, to the point of snapping. When he finally came home, he smelled freshly showered, like he'd gone out of his way to scrub the day off of him. He tossed his keys on the counter and muttered, "Long day," before heading upstairs. And then, for the first time ever, he made a mistake. He left his phone charging in the kitchen. I stood there, frozen, staring at that black rectangle glowing faintly on the counter. My hands trembled. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, because I knew that once I looked inside, there was no going back. I argued with myself in whispers. "Don't do it, Harper. Respect his privacy. You'll regret this." But then another voice shot back. "No, Harper. You deserve the truth. You've been living in the dark long enough." My body moved before my brain could catch up. I picked it up, swiped the screen, and prayed his old passcode still worked. It did, and what I saw inside shattered me. At first, it was small things, messages that seemed too personal to be work-related, notifications from an app I didn't recognize. Grindr. My breath caught in my throat. I tapped it open, and suddenly, the world tilted on its axis. There they were. Conversations. Pictures. Dozens of them. Men I'd never seen before, each with profiles, usernames, and chats that made my stomach churn. Explicit photos, flirty exchanges, meeting arrangements, and not just one, not two. Dozens. Landon wasn't having an affair. He was living a double life. I scrolled and scrolled, my heart breaking with every line I read. There were messages about hotel rooms, about quick meetups, about things I couldn't even repeat out loud without feeling sick. And then I found one thread that stopped. A man named Mason. The conversation was different with him, longer, more consistent. Less about physical encounters and more emotional. Landon had been seeing him regularly, meeting him, building something more than just hookups. I dropped the phone onto the counter like it had burned me. My chest heaved, my vision blurred, with tears. I pressed both hands to my mouth to keep from screaming. I wasn't just betrayed. I wasn't just cheated on. I was erased. The man I built my life with, the man I trusted, had been living an entirely different existence right under my nose, and he never had the decency, the courage, to tell me the truth. I staggered into the living room, collapsed onto the couch, and sobbed into my hands. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. I felt hollow, empty, like my life had been stolen from me. But when the tears finally dried, something inside me shifted. Anger. Cold, sharp, burning anger. I wasn't going to crumble. I wasn't going to let Landon destroy me. If he thought he could play me for a fool, he was about to learn who I really was. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding headache. Landon acted like nothing was wrong. Kissed me on the cheek, poured himself coffee, whistled as if he hadn't just stabbed me in the back 100 times over. And that's when it hit me. If he could live a double life, so could I. Not in the way he did. No, I didn't need to lie or sneak around. I needed to play a different game. Smarter, sharper. One he wouldn't see coming. I grabbed his phone when he left for the gym, this time copying down everything I could. Screenshots, names, dates. And Mason, especially Mason. That name stuck in my head all day. Mason. The one Landon seemed most attached to. The one who wasn't just a fling. Part of me wanted to hate him. To blame him for what Landon did. But another part of me, the logical part, knew Mason wasn't the enemy. Landon was. Still, I had to know. Who was Mason? Did he know Landon was married? Did he even care? That night, after Landon fell asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop glowing in the dark. I typed Mason's name into every social media search I could find. It took hours, but eventually, I found him. And when I did, my world changed again, because Mason wasn't what I expected. He wasn't some shady stranger lurking in the shadows. He looked normal, young, handsome, with a clean smile and a life. That seemed ordinary. He had pictures with friends, posts about work, even family photos. I clicked through every detail, my anger boiling. Did he know? Did he know Landon had a wife? Did he care? I couldn't stop myself. My hands shook as I typed out a message. My heart raced as I hit send. Hi. I think we need to talk. It's about Landon. And with that single message, I set into motion the chain of events that would destroy Landon Blake's perfect little secret life and give me the revenge I never knew I was capable of. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Landon's face, smiling, lying, betraying. My stomach twisted until I thought I might be sick. But beneath all that pain, a quiet fire burned. Determination. I kept staring at the message I sent to Mason. Hi. I think we need to talk. It's about Landon. It felt like dropping a match into gasoline. Hours crawled by before my phone buzzed. My hands shook as I read his reply. Who is this? I hesitated. For a moment, I considered deleting everything, pretending it never happened. But then I remembered the pictures, the texts, the months of deception. No, this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about truth. I typed back quickly, "My name is Harper Blake. I'm Landon's wife." Silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs, each second heavier than the last. Finally, the bubbles appeared, then vanished, appeared again, vanished. Mason was hesitating, probably trying to make sense of it all. At last, his response came. "You're joking, right?" I swallowed hard. I wish I was. But I'm not. This time, he called me. My phone lit up with an unknown number. I stared at it for a second, then swiped to answer. "Hello?" My voice cracked. The man on the other end sounded young, confused, and tense. "This is Mason. If this is some kind of game, it's not a game," I snapped, sharper than I meant to. Then I softened. "I wish it was. But Mason, Landon is my husband. We've been married for 7 years, and I think you deserve to know the truth as much as I do." Silence. Then a long breath. Jesus Christ. The weight of those words told me everything. He didn't know. We talked for hours that night. Mason told me how they met. Through Grindr, of course. He admitted Landon never mentioned me, not once. In fact, he'd painted himself as single, successful, and completely free. Mason had believed him. Why wouldn't he? Every detail cut me deeper. The late nights. The business trips. The lies Landon fed me were the same ones he fed Mason. We were both living inside his twisted web. But the longer we spoke, the more I realized something surprising. Mason wasn't cruel. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't the type to revel in destroying marriages. He was hurt, just like me, betrayed. And that's when it hit me. We weren't enemies. We were allies. By the time dawn crept through my curtains, we'd made a pact. We weren't going to let Landon keep lying, not to us, not to anyone. But while Mason wanted closure, I wanted something bigger. "Harper," Mason said softly, almost cautiously. "I get that you're angry. You should be." I stared out the window, watching the sun bleed across the Austin skyline. For the first time in weeks, I felt clarity. I'm going to take everything he tried to hide, every secret, every lie. Mason was quiet, then let out a humorless laugh. "I think I like you." That morning, I hid the exhaustion behind makeup and coffee. Landon shuffled downstairs, yawning, scrolling through his phone like nothing was wrong. My stomach churned at the sight of him. But I smiled, sweet, polite, the perfect wife. Inside, though, I was a storm. While Landon kissed me on the cheek and walked out the door, Mason and I were already exchanging plans. We created a private channel to share screenshots, voice notes, anything that tied Landon to his double life. Mason still had messages, photos, receipts. I had access to the house, to bank accounts, to legal documents. Together, we were building a case. One detail Mason revealed nearly made my blood boil. Just a week before, Landon had told him he was thinking about moving in together. With Mason. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Landon wasn't just cheating. He was preparing to throw me away like I was nothing, while using my money, my house, my life to build his fantasy. Not anymore. Over the next week, Mason and I spoke constantly. Every time Landon left the house, I'd sneak into his phone, collecting evidence. Every time Mason met up with him, he'd feed me updates. We were two strangers bound together by betrayal, working side by side in the shadows. And strangely, it felt good. For the first time in months, I wasn't powerless. I wasn't broken. I was in control. One night, Mason and I met in person at a quiet cafe downtown. I was nervous walking in. My mind swirled with questions. What if he was lying? What if Landon set this up? But when I saw him, the same young man from the pictures looking just as weary and heartbroken as I felt, my doubts disappeared. "Harper?" he asked, standing. I nodded. "Mason." We sat for hours, trading stories, piecing together timelines. Every lie Landon told us unraveled right there on the table between our coffees. And the more we uncovered, the more furious we became. At the end of the night, Mason leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "So, how far are you willing to go?" I looked him dead in the eye. "As far as it takes." And with that, our alliance was sealed. Landon Blake had no idea his carefully constructed double life was crumbling. No idea his wife and his lover were now partners. No idea the two people he betrayed most were planning the kind of revenge that would leave him with nothing. And the best part? He wouldn't see it coming. The first rule of revenge is patience. At least, that's what I told myself as Mason and I sat across from each other, scribbling notes on napkins like a pair of conspirators in a spy movie. It had been a week since our cafe meeting. In that time, Mason had fed Landon just enough attention to keep him hooked, while I perfected my role as the oblivious, supportive wife. Every smile I gave Landon, every kiss goodnight, every question about his late work nights made me sick to my stomach. But I wore the mask because I knew the endgame was coming. And God, was it going to be sweet. Mason leaned over the table, tapping his pen against a napkin where he'd sketched a rough timeline. "So the idea is simple. I'll invite him to a hotel, just us. He'll think it's one of our usual nights. That's when we nail him." I stared at the word hotel circled 3 times in black ink. My pulse quickened. This was it. The point of no return. "Okay," I said slowly. "But we need more than just catching him there. If I confront him, he'll deny it. He'll spin it. He's always been good at twisting things." Mason nodded. "True. Which is why we'll have receipts, pictures, messages. Hell, I'll even record him admitting it if I can." I felt a dark smile tug at the corner of my lips. "Good. And when he tries to wiggle out of it, I'll hit him with the prenup." That prenup. I silently thanked my father for insisting on it years ago, back when I thought he was being paranoid. At the time, I hated the idea. It felt cold, like he didn't trust Landon. Now? It was the very weapon that would free me and secure everything Landon thought he could take. All I needed was proof. Undeniable, airtight proof. Mason glanced up, his eyes serious. "Harper, are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we start, there's no turning back." I thought of all the nights I spent alone while Landon was with someone else. The lies, the humiliation, the way he looked at me like I was blind, stupid, disposable. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm sure." Next few days were a blur of preparation. Mason and I communicated constantly, making sure our stories lined up, making sure Landon suspected nothing. Landon, of course, was oblivious. He strutted around the house like he was king of the world, making small talk, kissing me on the forehead, telling me how busy he was at work. It took everything in me not to spit the truth in his face right then and there. But I had to wait. Timing was everything. One night, Mason texted me. "He's biting." I told him I wanted to see him this weekend, said I booked a hotel. "He's in." Stared at the screen, my hands trembling. This was it. The trap was set. The plan was simple, but flawless. Mason would lure Landon to the hotel. I'd be there, hidden, waiting. Mason would step out, leaving Landon vulnerable. Then I'd confront him, prenup in hand, evidence ready. Part of me wanted to scream, to destroy him right there in the middle of our kitchen. But another part, the colder, sharper part, knew this had to be calculated, controlled, a performance, and I was ready to play my part. The night before the trap, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Landon, staring at the ceiling, listening to his even breathing. How many times had he done this before? How many nights had he fallen asleep next to me after being with Mason? Or someone else? Rage bubbled inside me, but I forced it down. Tomorrow it would all be over. At dawn, I slipped out of bed and sat by the window with a cup of coffee. Austin was just waking up, the skyline painted with streaks of pink and gold. It should have been beautiful. Instead, all I felt was anticipation, like standing on the edge of a cliff. Mason called me later that morning. His voice was steady, but I could tell he was nervous. "Okay, the room's booked. 7 o'clock. You'll be in place before he gets there?" "Yes," I whispered, my throat dry. "I'll be there." "Good, Harper. After this, everything changes." "You ready for that?" I took a deep breath. I've been ready since the night I found those messages. The hours leading up to the meeting crawled by. I busied myself with chores, double-checking my bag, rehearsing what I would say. The prenup was folded neatly inside, along with every screenshot Mason and I had gathered. It felt like carrying a loaded gun. By the time I pulled up to the hotel that evening, my hands were slick with sweat. Mason met me in the lobby, his face tight with nerves. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, though my stomach twisted into knots. "Let's do this." We rode the elevator in silence, the hum of the machinery filling the tense air between us. When we reached the room, Mason swiped the keycard and let me in. The room was quiet, sterile, smelling faintly of cleaning supplies. A perfect stage. Mason pointed toward the bathroom. "You'll wait in there. When I text you, give it a minute, then come out." I nodded and stepped inside. The bathroom light buzzed overhead, reflecting off the spotless mirror. I caught a glimpse of myself. Wide eyes, clenched jaw, every muscle taut with adrenaline. This was it. From the other room, I heard Mason pacing, then the faint buzz of his phone. "Yeah, I'm here," he said, his voice low but calm. "Room's ready. Just come up." My heart pounded in my ears. Landon was on his way. I gripped the prenup tighter, the paper crinkling in my hand. Soon, everything would unravel. The door opened. I heard Landon's familiar laugh, that easy, confident tone he always used to charm people. "Hey, Mason," he said warmly, completely unaware of the storm waiting behind the bathroom door. Mason played his part perfectly. "Glad you made it. Give me a sec. I'm just gonna freshen up real quick." His footsteps approached the bathroom. The door cracked open, and he slipped inside for a moment. His eyes met mine, steady, reassuring. "It's time," he whispered. Then he was gone. I was alone, waiting. Every second stretched like an eternity. I could hear Landon moving around the room, dropping his keys, humming casually. Like nothing in the world could touch him. But in 1 minute, everything he thought he had, his lies, his double life, his control, would shatter. And I would be the one holding the hammer. I could hear every sound in that room. The rustle of Landon's jacket hitting the chair, the jingle of coins when he emptied his pockets, the creak of the bed when he sat down, probably scrolling through his phone, waiting for Mason to come back. From the bathroom. My palms were slick with sweat, but my grip on the prenup was steady. This was the moment I had imagined 100 times, and now that it was here, it felt unreal, like a scene from a movie I'd been dropped into. I took a deep breath, trying to quiet the storm inside my chest. Then Mason's voice floated from the other room, light and casual. "Hey, babe, I'll be right out." That was my cue. I pushed open the bathroom door, and for a heartbeat, time froze. Landon turned toward the sound, smiling, that same smile that used to melt me when we first met. For a split second, he thought it was Mason, but when his eyes landed on me, the smile dissolved into confusion, then shock, then something darker. Harper? His voice cracked on my name. What the hell are you— Surprise, I said, stepping fully into the room. My voice was calm, almost too calm. The prenup trembled slightly in my hand, but I kept it raised like a shield. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth again, but no words came out. Mason slipped past me, his role complete. He gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod before moving toward the door. I'll give you 2 minutes. Don't you— Landon started, his voice sharp, but Mason was already gone. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving just the two of us in that suffocating room. I let the silence hang, let Landon stew in it. He shifted uncomfortably, his bravado faltering. Finally, he tried to recover, forcing a smirk. So, this is what? Some kind of intervention? You following me around now? I took a slow step closer, my heels clicking against the carpet. No, Landon. This isn't an intervention. This is an ending. His smirk faded. Ending? What are you talking about? I held up the papers, flipping to the highlighted section of the prenup. The fluorescent light glinted off the yellow marker. You remember this, don't you? Infidelity. Clause. Signed, dated, witnessed, 1 act of cheating with proof, and it's over. You lose everything. He blinked at the paper, then back at me. You wouldn't. Oh, I would, I said, my voice sharp. I already have. I reached into my bag and tossed a folder onto the bed beside him. He flinched when it hit the comforter. Dozens of printed screenshots spilled out, texts, photos, messages from Mason. Evidence so damning it was impossible to refute. He picked one up with trembling fingers. I watched his eyes dart across the words he'd typed, the pictures he'd sent. His lips parted, but no excuses came. You planned this, he muttered finally, his voice low. You and him. You set me up. I tilted my head. No, Landon. You set yourself up the moment you decided your double life was more important than our marriage. Mason didn't trick you into sending those messages. He didn't force you to sneak around. That was all you. For the first time since I'd known him, Landon looked small. His shoulders hunched, his eyes wide, his hands fumbling with the papers like they might somehow vanish if he held them tight enough. Harper, please, he stammered. We can fix this. I'll stop. I'll delete everything. I'll cut it off with him, with everyone. I'll go to therapy. Just don't do this. His desperation might have swayed me once, but not anymore. Not after. The lies, the humiliation, the sleepless nights wondering why I wasn't enough. I took another step forward until I was standing directly in front of him. You don't get to beg for mercy now. You had years to come clean. You had chances. And every time you chose the lie, he shook his head violently, like a child refusing reality. You're gonna ruin me. Everything I've worked for, gone. My reputation, my job, my house. Our house, I corrected, my voice cold. My house, my car, my savings. Because you signed this, I tapped the prenup. And because you couldn't keep your lies straight. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear his breath hitch, the faint hum of the air conditioner, even the dull thud of my own heartbeat. Landon's mask slipped completely then. No charm, no excuses, just raw panic. He surged to his feet, towering over me. You think you've won, Harper? You think you can just take everything and walk away? I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, my voice steady as stone. No, Landon, I know I can. He opened his mouth to fire back, but I cut him off. And if you even think about trying to fight this in court, I have more evidence than you could ever refute. Screenshots, messages, recordings. Mason was thorough. his face contorted with rage, but I saw the truth in his eyes. He knew he was cornered. Finally, he slumped back down onto the bed, burying his face in his hands. The mighty Landon Blake, the man who thought he could juggle lies and lovers, reduced to a broken heap in a hotel room. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You know what hurts the most?" I said softly, my voice breaking for the first time. "It's not that you cheated. It's that you looked me in the eye every day, kissed me goodnight, and thought I'd never notice. You thought I was too stupid, too blind, to ever catch on." His shoulders shook, but he didn't respond. I turned toward the door, my heels clicking like punctuation marks on the carpet. I paused with my hand on the knob, glancing back one final time. "Enjoy the hotel room, Landon. It's the last luxury you'll ever afford." Then I walked out, the prenup clutched tightly in my hand, and never looked back. The hallway outside felt like another world, brighter, freer. Mason was waiting near the elevator, his expression tense. When he saw me, his shoulders dropped with relief. "Well?" he asked. "It's done," I said, my voice steady. "He knows." Mason gave a small nod, his lips pressing into a thin line. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, listening to the ding of the elevator as it approached. When the doors slid open, I stepped inside, inhaling deeply. The tension that had clung to me for weeks began to lift. The trap had been sprung, but I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. There were still legal battles to fight, reputations to dismantle, and pieces of my life to rebuild. Landon might have been broken tonight, but men like him rarely surrendered quietly. As the elevator doors closed, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored panel. For the first time in years, I didn't see a victim. I saw someone dangerous, and I wasn't finished. The next morning, my house didn't feel like my house anymore. The walls were the same soft cream color, the furniture still perfectly arranged, the kitchen still smelling faintly of vanilla candles. But everything had shifted. Every object felt like it belonged to a stranger. I had built this home with Landon, and now every corner reminded me of his betrayal. I stood in the kitchen, staring at my coffee cup as steam curled upward. My reflection in the glossy surface looked tired, hollowed out, but sharp at the edges. It was over. At least, that's what I told myself. I had the prenup. I had the evidence. I had cornered him in that hotel room and watched his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. But deep inside, I knew the battle wasn't finished. Men like Landon didn't lose gracefully. The sound of my phone vibrating on the counter snapped me out of my daze. I glanced at the screen. Mason. "Morning," I answered softly, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "You okay?" His voice was low, cautious. "I slept about 2 hours, so not exactly," I admitted. "But I'm alive." "That's more than I can say for Landon," Mason said with a humorless laugh. "He looked like he'd seen a ghost when you walked out of that room." The memory made my chest tighten. Good. He deserved it. "You think he'll come after you?" Mason asked after a beat. "Oh, I know he will," I replied, staring out the window at the perfectly trimmed lawn. "The only question is how far he'll go." By noon, I was sitting in my father's old lawyer's office downtown. Mr. Carrington had handled the prenup years ago when my dad insisted on it. At the time, I'd thought he was paranoid, maybe even cruel. Now I knew better. Mr. Carrington adjusted his glasses, flipping through the folder of evidence I'd given him. His office smelled faintly of old books and leather, and the tick of a grandfather clock filled the silence as he read. "This is comprehensive," he finally said, looking up at me. "You'll have no problem enforcing the infidelity clause. Legally speaking, Landon doesn't have a leg to stand on." "Good," I said firmly, even as my hands trembled in my lap. "But," Carrington added, his voice measured, "I should warn you. Cases like this can get messy. He'll try to drag things out, delay, intimidate. Men in his position don't like being backed into a corner. I exhaled slowly. I'm ready for messy. He studied me for a long moment before nodding. Then we'll proceed. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house, every flicker of headlights passing outside made me jump. It was irrational, I told myself. Landon wouldn't do something stupid. Not yet. Not while he knew I had leverage. Still, when I finally crawled into bed, I left the lamp on. Sleep didn't come easily. And when it did, it was full of jagged dreams. Landon's face twisting in rage, Mason's warnings echoing in my ears, papers burning in a fire I couldn't put out. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. And that's when I saw it. On the nightstand, where I'd left nothing but a glass of water, sat a single folded note. My stomach dropped as I reached for it with trembling hands. Inside, in Landon's familiar handwriting, were just 4 words: "You can't escape me." The next morning, I stormed into Carrington's office, shoving the note onto his desk. "He was in my house," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "He broke in while I was sleeping." Carrington frowned deeply, picking up the paper. "This changes things. We can file a restraining order, add harassment to the divorce proceedings." "I don't want paperwork," I snapped, my voice breaking. "I want him gone." The old lawyer sighed, steepling his fingers. "The law can only do so much, Harper. But if Landon truly is escalating, we need to be strategic. Keep documenting everything. Every text, every call, every note." My chest ached with frustration. Strategic. Careful. Meanwhile, Landon was already playing dirty. Later that evening, Mason called again. His tone was different this time. Sharper, urgent. "Harper, listen. Landon's been texting me all day, threatening me. He's unraveling. He's not just angry. He's dangerous." My blood ran cold. "What did he say?" "He said if I don't back off, he's going to ruin me. He mentioned my job, my family, even where I live. He knows details he shouldn't know. He's digging, Harper. He's not going down quietly." I pressed a hand to my forehead, my pulse racing. God, this is spiraling faster than I thought. "Yeah," Mason muttered. "You lit a fuse, and now he's burning everything on. His way out." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of evidence, the prenup, the lawyer's card. This was supposed to be clean, clinical. I had proof, I had leverage, I had the law on my side. But Landon wasn't fighting with evidence. He was fighting with fear, and I could feel him tightening the noose. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "If he wants war, he'll get war." The words hung in the air like a promise, because I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my freedom, my safety, my life, and I wasn't about to lose. The first court date was set for a Tuesday morning. I spent the night before pacing the hallway, barely able to breathe. Every time I tried to lie down, the image of Landon's note flashed in my mind. "You can't escape me." By dawn, I was dressed. In a crisp black blazer, hair pinned into a low bun, makeup applied with precision. Not because I cared about looking good for Landon, but because I wanted to look unbreakable. When I walked into that courthouse, I wasn't going to be his wife anymore. I was going to be his adversary. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and old wood. My heels clicked against the floor as I entered, flanked by Carrington. And there he was. Landon, sitting at the defendant's table in a tailored navy suit, looking as smug as ever. For a moment, our eyes locked, his lips curled into the faintest smirk, like this was all a game to him. I felt my stomach knot, but I didn't look away. Instead, I let my glare slice through him. When the judge called the case, the tension in the air thickened. Carrington stood, presenting the evidence methodically, photos, messages, screenshots, even hotel receipts. Each piece of proof was like a dagger thrown into Landon's perfect facade. But Landon didn't flinch. When his lawyer rose, a tall man with slicked back hair, I braced myself. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my client does not deny a lapse in judgment. But what we have here is not a marriage destroyed by infidelity. It's a woman exploiting a technicality in a contract for financial gain. This is not about love. This is about greed." Greed. The word stung, but I forced myself to stay still, jaw clenched. "Mrs. Blake has orchestrated this entire scheme," the lawyer continued, voice rising. "She befriended one of my client's acquaintances for the sole purpose of entrapment. This isn't justice. This is vengeance." I could feel my blood boiling. Entrapment. Vengeance. As if Landon hadn't been lying and sneaking around for years. The judge rapped her gavel lightly. "We will review the evidence before moving forward. Both parties are to refrain from personal accusations outside the scope of this court." The session ended with no resolution, just dates for discovery and depositions. The war was only beginning. That night, Mason came over. He leaned against my kitchen counter, watching me pour a glass of wine with trembling hands. "They're twisting it," I muttered bitterly. "Making it sound like I'm the villain." Mason shook his head. "Anyone with half a brain can see. What's really going on? He's just buying time. That's what people like him do." I sighed, sinking into a chair. "I can handle legal battles, but what about the rest? The notes, the threats, the games?" Mason hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "You should see this." On the screen was a screenshot of a fake social media account. The profile picture was my face, taken from some old photo I'd posted years ago. The bio said, "Homewrecker. Gold digger. Watch your back." My chest constricted. "He's making fake accounts?" "Not just that," Mason said grimly. "There are comments under his real profile, subtle digs about you, things only he would know. He's trying to turn people against you." I pressed my hands to my temples. It wasn't enough for him to ruin our marriage. He wanted to ruin my name, my sanity. "Let him," I whispered after a moment, surprising even myself. The more desperate he gets, the sloppier his trail. Every threat, every fake account, it's all more evidence. Mason studied me, then nodded slowly. "That's the Harper I know, turning his poison into ammo." 2 nights later, I woke to a sound outside my window. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard it again. A faint scrape, like metal against glass. My heart pounded as I slipped out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat I kept near. The closet. I edged toward the window, every nerve on fire. And then, through the sheer curtains, I saw him. Landon, standing in the yard, staring up at me. His face half hidden in shadow, but unmistakable. I froze, breath caught in my throat. He didn't move, didn't shout, didn't even try to come closer. He just stood there watching. I yanked the curtain shut, hands shaking violently. When I looked again, a minute later, he was gone. But the image of him standing there burned into my brain. The next morning, Carrington filed for a restraining order. The judge granted a temporary one, but it didn't make me feel safer. A piece of paper couldn't stop Landon, at least not the Landon I had come to know. The one unraveling, the one playing. A game with no rules. I found myself double-checking locks, glancing over my shoulder at the grocery store, avoiding dark parking lots. My life had shrunk into a box of fear, and I hated it. One night, Mason came over again, finding me sitting at the table with my head in my hands. "I can't keep living like this," I admitted, waiting for him to show up. Wondering what's next, Mason reached across the table, taking my hand gently. "Then don't wait. Fight back harder. Make the next move." His words lit something inside me. He was right. Landon thought he had the upper hand, but he didn't know what I was capable of when cornered. This wasn't just about winning in court anymore. This was about ending his control over me, once and for all, and I was ready to play a game he couldn't win. After that night, after seeing Landon in my yard like some phantom watching me sleep, something inside me shifted. Fear had carried me this far, but it wasn't enough anymore. Fear wasn't going to protect me. Fear wasn't going to win. This war, I needed to become someone Landon didn't recognize. Someone who didn't flinch at his threats. Someone who could fight dirt with fire. And Mason, bless him, was right. I had to make the next move. The plan started small. Step 1. I created a brand new social account under a fake identity. A woman Landon's type, dark hair, slim build, witty captions. I used AI-generated photos that looked eerily real but didn't belong to any actual person. Step 2. I followed him. Not immediately. I waited a few days, sprinkled in some likes on vague motivational quotes, made the account look authentic, and then I slid into his DMs. The bait was set. It didn't take long. Landon had always been weak when it came to temptation. Within 3 days, he was responding. Flirty comments, late-night chats, carefully phrased messages that hinted at secret meetings. I screenshotted everything, every word, every emoji, every timestamp. Meanwhile, in the real world, Landon was unraveling faster. The restraining order hadn't stopped him from circling my street in his car late at night. Mason caught him once, parked a block away, lights off. I filed another complaint, but the police shrugged. Unless he does something physical, there's not much we can do. Not much they could do, but I could. The next escalation came in the form of an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a photo of me at the grocery store, taken just 2 days earlier. On the back, in his unmistakable handwriting, still watching. My blood ran cold, but instead of crying, I laughed, because what he didn't realize was that the photo itself was evidence. The store had cameras, and so did the parking lot. I turned the photo over to Carrington, who filed it immediately as harassment. Another nail in his coffin. One evening, Mason and I sat at my kitchen table, laptops open, scrolling through the fake profiles conversations with Landon. "This is insane," Mason muttered, shaking his head. "He's so reckless." "Reckless. Works in our favor," I said quietly. "The more he thinks he's in control, the more he slips." Mason looked at me, concern etched across his face. "You're starting to sound like him." I paused, staring at the glowing screen. Maybe he was right. Maybe this new version of me, cold, calculating, always thinking 2 steps ahead, wasn't the old Harper anymore. But then I remembered the nights I'd cried alone, the window shadows, the notes, the betrayal, and I thought, good, maybe. It was time Landon saw what his games had created. The final piece of my plan fell into place 2 weeks later. Landon had agreed, or rather, the fake woman had convinced him, to meet at a hotel. Same hotel he'd once taken Mason to. The irony wasn't lost on me, but this time I wasn't hiding in the bathroom. This time I was holding the strings. Carrington and a private investigator he'd hired were in the next room, ready with cameras and audio recorders. Mason was in the lobby, watching every entrance and exit. And me? I was in disguise. A wig, sunglasses, simple black clothes. I checked into a separate room under a fake name and waited for the signal. At 8:13 p.m., Mason texted me. "He's here." My pulse kicked into overdrive. Through the peephole, I saw him enter the room across the hall, thinking he was about to meet his new conquest. He carried himself with that same arrogant swagger, the same careless confidence that had once fooled me. But tonight, it was all about to crumble. The moment he sat down on the hotel bed, Carrington's investigator walked in with a hidden camera, still rolling. "Mr. Blake," he said calmly, "you're being recorded." Landon's head whipped around, his face draining of color. "What the hell is this?" The investigator didn't answer. He just kept the lens trained on him as Carrington entered next, holding a folder. "In case it isn't clear, Landon," Carrington said smoothly, "we now have ample evidence, beyond any doubt, of repeated infidelity, harassment, and breach of contract. This isn't a negotiation anymore. It's a clean sweep." Landon's jaw worked furiously, eyes darting like a trapped animal. "You set me up! This is entrapment!" Carrington's tone stayed calm. "Entrapment requires law enforcement involvement. This is just discovery." I stepped out then, pulling off the wig, sunglasses dangling from my hand. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Hello, Landon," I said, my voice steady, sharp as glass. He shot up from the bed, face twisted with rage. "You think you've won? You think this is over?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "No, Landon, I don't think. I know." For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Later that night, back at my house, Mason poured me a drink. "You played him like a fiddle," he said with a grin. I sipped my wine, the warmth spreading through my chest. He thought he was the hunter. Turns out he was the prey all along. But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't the end. Men like Landon don't just slink away quietly. He would fight harder, lash out nastier, get darker. And that was fine, because I was ready for whatever came next. I wasn't the same Harper who once cried herself to sleep, wondering why her husband didn't love her anymore. That woman was gone. The new me? I was fire, and I was done being afraid. I had thought catching him on camera would be the end of it, that maybe finally Landon would see he was finished and just disappear. But men like him don't go quietly. They don't surrender. They claw, they scratch, they burn everything around them just to feel like they still have control, and that's exactly what Landon did. It started with the smear campaign. One morning, I woke up to over 40 missed calls and dozens of texts from friends, co-workers, even distant relatives. My phone buzzed nonstop with alerts. I opened Facebook, and my stomach dropped. There it was. A long, venomous post from Landon, tagging me by name. He painted me as some manipulative, greedy wife who'd staged an elaborate setup to steal everything from him. He claimed I'd faked evidence, tricked him, used Mason as bait. But he didn't stop there. Attached were screenshots, personal texts I'd once sent him, taken out of context, twisted to look like admissions of guilt. He even uploaded an old photo of Mason leaving my house, captioned, "Proof my wife cheated on me first." My heart pounded. My hands shook as I scrolled through the hundreds of comments. Some people defended me, but others ate it up. Strangers, co-workers, old acquaintances, all chiming in, judging, gossiping. Maybe she's the problem. Typical gold digger move. Poor guy. She ruined him. My perfect American dream life had officially exploded into a public circus. At work, the whispers followed me. In the grocery store, I felt eyes on my back. Even at the gym, I caught two women snickering as I walked past. It was like he'd poisoned the air around me. And Landon knew it. Because 2 days later, another note appeared. On my car windshield, written in that same sharp handwriting. "Not so perfect anymore, huh?" I crumpled the paper in my fist, heat burning behind my eyes. For a moment, the old me, the broken, crying, desperate me, tried to claw her way back. But no, not this time. This wasn't the end. This was war. Carrington assured me the smear campaign only strengthened our case. Defamation, harassment, ongoing intimidation. He ticked off like items on a grocery list. It all paints a clearer picture of his instability, but even he admitted the court process would take time. Too much time, and Landon wasn't waiting. One night, I came home to find my back door slightly ajar, my chest seized. Slowly, I stepped inside. The air felt heavy, still, wrong. Everything looked untouched, until I reached the bedroom. My dresser drawers were pulled out, clothes scattered on the floor, my perfume bottles smashed against the wall, and across the mirror, in red lipstick, smeared words, liar, thief. I froze, bile rising in my throat. He'd been here, in my home, in my safe place. I called the police immediately, hands trembling. But by the time they arrived, Landon was long gone. They filed a report, took pictures, shook their heads. "We'll add it to the record," one officer said. Add it to the record, like that would keep him from coming back. That night, Mason insisted on staying over. I wanted to argue, to tell him I could handle it. But when I lay down in bed, staring at the shattered glass still glittering in the carpet, I realized I couldn't. Not alone. He sat awake in the living room, baseball bat propped against his knee, while I tried, and failed, to sleep. Every car passing outside jolted me awake. I felt like prey in my own home. And yet, beneath the fear, a seed of rage kept growing. How dare he still think he could control me? How dare he take what was mine, my peace, my reputation, my safety, and twist it into something rotten? He thought this was breaking me, but he was wrong. This was forging me. The next morning, Carrington sat with me and Mason at his office, laying out the next steps. "We need to file an emergency restraining order," he said firmly. "And I want to push for a criminal charge for breaking and entering. The judge needs to see how dangerous this is becoming." Mason leaned forward. "But what about her safety right now? He's escalating." Carrington's expression softened. "I know. Which is why I'm also recommending... Harper, you shouldn't. Stay at your house for a while, at least until we get him off the streets." The thought of leaving my home twisted my stomach. But Mason was already nodding. "She can stay with me. Safer that way." I wanted to protest, but I didn't. Because, deep down, I knew they were right. Landon wasn't just trying to ruin me legally, he was trying to break me physically. And the next step could be worse than lipstick on a mirror. That night, as I packed a small bag of essentials, I found myself staring at the wedding photo still shoved in the back of my closet. Me in white, smiling. Him in black, grinning like he'd won some prize. I ripped the photo in half. Then again. And again. Until all that was left were tiny scraps of paper. I whispered into the empty room. "You wanted a war, Landon? You've got one." And for the first time, I didn't feel fear when I said it. I felt power. The night it happened, the air felt heavy, thick, charged, like the whole city was holding its breath. I was staying at Mason's apartment, trying to pretend like my life hadn't turned into a twisted reality show. He'd made dinner, tried to make me laugh. For a while, it worked. But as I climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the unease pressing on my chest. That sixth sense you get when you know something's coming, and I was right. The crash came at 2:14 a.m. Glass, shattering. Wood splintering. I shot upright in bed, my heart hammering. Mason was already up, grabbing the baseball bat, his voice sharp. "Stay here!" But I knew who it was. Landon. The devil had finally come to collect. I crept to the bedroom doorway, pulse roaring in my ears. Mason stood in the living room, bat raised, staring at the shadowy figure who'd just kicked in the door. Landon. His face was wild, eyes bloodshot, hair disheveled. In his hand, not a bat, not a knife, but a gun. My blood ran cold. "Put it down, Landon," Mason shouted, voice steady but tight. Landon laughed, a hollow, manic sound. "Oh, isn't this cute? My wife and her little boyfriend playing." His voice dripped with venom. "You think you can take everything from me? My house, my money, my life? No, no, Harper. If I can't have you, nobody will." The barrel of the gun swung toward me. I froze, every muscle locking in place. This wasn't court documents. This wasn't social media slander. This was life or death. But something inside me snapped. I was done being the victim, done letting him control the narrative. "No, Landon," I said, my voice low but steady. "You don't own me. Not my body, not my life, not my future. You lost the second you lied. And tonight, you've already lost again." His jaw clenched. He stepped closer, raising the gun higher. Mason shifted, ready to swing. And that's when flashing red and blue lights cut through the blinds. Police sirens wailed outside. Landon's head jerked toward the window, panic flashing in his eyes. He hadn't counted on Mason's neighbor hearing the crash and calling 911. "Drop the weapon! Now!" a voice thundered from outside. Landon's chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temples. His eyes darted between me, Mason, and the door. Trapped. Cornered. For a second, I thought he'd do it, that he'd pull the trigger anyway, just to feel like he'd won. But instead, he screamed, a raw animal sound, and hurled the gun at the wall. It clattered to the floor. Police burst through the door seconds later, tackling him to the ground. "Get your hands off me!" Landon roared, thrashing as they cuffed him. "She ruined everything! She ruined everything!" But his words didn't scare me anymore, because he wasn't in control. Not anymore. Hours later, I sat in the police station, giving my statement. Mason sat beside me, his hand resting over mine, grounding me. The officers assured us the charges were serious: breaking and entering, possession of a firearm, intent to harm, combined with the harassment, the threats, the prenup violations. Landon's empire of lies had finally collapsed in on itself, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. When we finally left the station, the sun was rising. The sky glowed, with streaks of pink and gold, a new day unfurling before me. I stood there on the sidewalk, hair a mess, eyes heavy, body drained. But I felt lighter, because Landon was gone, and I was still standing. Later that morning, Carrington called. His voice was calm but triumphant. "Harper, this seals it. With everything that's happened, the divorce will be finalized in your favor. You'll keep the house, the assets, your reputation. And Landon." He paused, letting the weight settle. "We'll spend a long time behind bars." I closed, my eyes, the words washing over me. It wasn't just justice. It was freedom. Mason drove me home after. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence between us felt safe, steady. When we pulled into my driveway, my house, still mine, I stared at it for a long moment. The windows glinted in the sunlight. The lawn swayed in the breeze. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like mine again. I turned to Mason. "I never thought I'd get here," I whispered. He squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think, Harper. You always were." That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, the same place I'd once hidden, shaking in fear. I stared at my reflection, messy hair, tired eyes, a faint scar of lipstick still staining the corner of the mirror, and for the first time in years I smiled, because I wasn't just the wife who'd been cheated on. I wasn't just the woman who'd been betrayed. I was the woman who fought back, who survived, and who won. The house was quiet. Not the suffocating kind of silence, the kind that used to gnaw at me late at night while Landon stayed out with his excuses. No, this was a soft silence, a peaceful one, the kind that made you want to curl up with a blanket and just breathe. It had been 3 weeks since the night Landon broke into Mason's apartment. 3 weeks since I'd watched the police drag him out in handcuffs, screaming like a man whose kingdom had crumbled. 3 weeks since I realized I was finally, truly free. The divorce finalized faster than I ever thought possible. Carrington called me with the news, his voice brisk but carrying an undertone of satisfaction. "It's all done, Harper. The court granted you full rights to the house, the savings accounts, and the settlement." "And Landon?" I asked quietly, though I already knew. "Facing multiple charges," he replied. "With his record, his behavior, and the evidence we submitted, he'll be in prison for a long while. The appeal process won't save him this time." When the call ended, I sat on the kitchen counter, just staring out the window. For months, my life had been nothing but chaos, fear, anger, and betrayal. And now? Now it was mine again. At first, I didn't know what to do with that freedom. For years, I'd been Landon's wife. The woman who smiled at parties, who wore the right dress, who laughed at the right jokes, who pretended everything was perfect while my world cracked underneath me. But now, when people looked at me, they didn't see his shadow. They saw me, and let me tell you, reclaiming that name felt like pulling Excalibur from the stone. Heavy, powerful, unshakable. I started with small things, painting the kitchen cabinets a color I actually liked. Soft sage green instead of sterile. White. Replacing Landon's pretentious abstract art with photos I'd taken on hikes. Buying fresh sheets that smelled like lavender and sunshine, instead of the expensive hotel white he insisted on. Every change felt like planting a new flag. And when I walked through the rooms at night, barefoot, glass of wine in hand, I didn't feel haunted anymore. I felt safe. Mason checked in often. At first, he came by every day, fixing things around the house, bringing takeout, cracking jokes that made me laugh even when I wanted to cry. He never pushed, never asked for more than I could give. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies, he turned to me and said, "You know, you don't owe me anything. Not friendship, not whatever comes after this. I just want you to be happy, Harper." I looked at him then, really looked. At the man who'd been betrayed by Landon just like I had, yet chose to help me instead of turning bitter. At the man who stood between me and danger without hesitation. And I realized something. He wasn't my rebound. He wasn't my plot twist. He was my proof. Proof that not every man lied. That not everyone would stab me in the back. That maybe, just maybe, love could look different. I didn't say anything that night, but I smiled and let myself feel peace. Of course, Landon tried one last trick. From prison, he wrote me letters. Pages of venom, threats, begging, sometimes even sweet-talking like the charming man I once thought he was. I didn't open them. Instead, I stacked them in a shoebox, sealed it shut, and shoved it in the attic. Because his words no longer had power over me, let him rot in his cell, spinning his webs. I was done being the fly. Weeks turned into months. I started traveling again, something I'd put off for years because Landon hated airports. I hiked the Rockies, took a weekend, even started a photography blog, something I used to dream about but never had the courage to do. Each photo I posted felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost along the way. One night, I scrolled through the comments on my latest post. A stranger had written, "Your photos feel alive, like they've been through something and survived." I stared at those words for a long time, because they didn't just describe the photos, they described me. On the anniversary of the night everything fell apart, I stood in my backyard watching the sun sink low. Mason was beside me, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To freedom," he said, clinking his glass against mine. I laughed, softly. To freedom, and to finally letting go. We drank, the bubbles fizzing on my tongue, the sunset painting the sky in fire and gold. And I realized something else. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living.